Hey, good morning, everyone, or good evening. Thanks for coming along to our session in Ljubljana. Well, as we already said, this is going to be recorded, and feel free to also say you don't want to be recorded and switch off your camera. But also, if you have questions and so on, put them in the chat if you want. And yes, in Ljubljana, there is a whole kind of culture of engaging with kindness and respect. So I just open that space again, but with everyone I see here, I think that's anyway the basis we have for interaction between us. So today it's here, Silvia and me, Silvia Kohn and Bianca Elzenbaumer, and we are running this session to talk about how the new European Bauhaus meets community economies. So what we're going to do today is really talk about this Erasmus project that we're running since last year, show you how we go about of thinking how this new European Bauhaus meets community economies, and then talking about some of the findings. What are we finding out in these mapping sessions we run? So maybe a bit of an intro to the Bauhaus, the new European Bauhaus. It's a program, it's an initiative by the EU. It has been launched in 2021 by Ursula von der Leyen and her team, really with this idea to kind of, how they call it, to give a soul to the Green Deal, to the European Green Deal. So it's about how do we bring the ecological transition, how do we bring zero carbon lifestyles into people's everyday, how do we ground them in Europe? And what we find really interesting is that this initiative really focuses on the role of art, design, architecture in grounding the ecological transition and making it real. And in fact, also some of the Community Economies Research Network's members were nominated and even won the new European Bauhaus Prize that is taking place every year. So the Forno Vagabondo project is one of La Foresta's project that we're part of. We were not finalists. I think it was in 2022. Then there is Krater, which is a project by Trajna, based in Slovenia. And they are also members of CERN. And then there is Rurban, that is run by Doina Petrescu and Konstantin Petcu, who are actually winners of the new European Bauhaus Prize in 2022. And this whole project came about because we went to this kind of big party, big celebration in Brussels in 2022. And we're looking at each other in that space saying like, well, isn't it kind of interesting? We're sitting in this space.
Yeah, we're both here.
We're here. We're kind of in this whole prize-giving ceremony. On the one hand, we don't really identify with the growth narrative of the Green Deal, and yet we're all here. Some of us are even getting the prize. But also, if we look at how we're doing economically in terms of like conventional terms, it's not like we're, getting amazing incomes of this or anything. It was really all of us struggling with making our initiatives work, but also doing this in very interesting ways. And so we thought, okay, this could actually be something to look into a bit more carefully. And so we applied for a small-scale Erasmus fund, which means we have 60,000 euros? No, 60,000. So we have 60,000 euros for 2 years for Trajna and La Foresta to get the new European Bauhaus community together to map our economies. So really the whole project is about what's going on behind the scenes of this project. So these projects are uplifted on stage, they're shown, but how are they actually sustained? And this is what the project looks like.
I'm just going to go to the next slide so you can see also us here in Krater. This is the team. You can see Guy and Andre to Bianca's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm working on the project with Bianca on the side of La Foresta.
And so we think it's interesting because we have like, maybe, Trajna would be, I think, like the younger generations, then maybe I would be like, La Foresta would be like a mid-generation kind of thing. And Doina and AAA, they're kind of, our tutors, our mentors. So it's really spanning different generations. And for the project, what we did was mapping sessions online so far. So we started in April this year, getting people that were shortlisted for the new European Bauhaus Prize to meet online and have conversations about our economies. And maybe you want to give an overview of what we
maybe
have?
we show the website first to show a little bit more of an overview of the project. Basically, we are creating a network, as Bianca said, with other finalists or shortlisted projects of the new European Bauhaus Prize. And this is our website. We definitely encourage you to visit it because we've already posted some of the webinars. So we've been, again, this is the team. We've been doing the mapping sessions during webinars, and by basically hand selecting projects that we feel like align with our vision of how the European Bauhaus can be applied to our projects, but maybe also bringing in other experiences that help to add more nuance to the project as well. So you can see here, this is the process of the project. We started with network creation, which me and the other communication manager from Trajna worked together on. And then we are doing 6 webinars. We've done 5 so far. And then we'll do an in-presence event next year, which obviously you would also all be invited to attend. We're still working on launching the communication for that. And here at the bottom, you'll find the webinars recorded and posted here as well so far. And eventually there'll be more information about the spring school as well as a way to register. And we're also obviously sharing some more pedagogical materials, and plan to also do a session during the spring school where we do kind of a collective archive with the people in attendance. So that's the project. You can find out more also about Forno Vagabondo or about Krater, as well as other projects that Trajna is working on, like the Not White paper as well. So
go back to our slides.
Here we go. So this is what we've mapped so far. We started first with the topic of how do you fund it, and we readapted the iceberg, the famous iceberg, and just made it into a water line, and then also made it into a timeline. So you'll see some examples of these maps as well. It'll be a bit more clear. For now, we're just kind of providing these quick, sketchy overview. But the idea is the same. It's to map the non-monetary and monetary things that fund the project over time, so that we added kind of this extra layer. Then the second is, how do you keep going in spite of everything? And this was all about precarity and also what supports the project. So what strategies do people find to, deal with the precarious working conditions? How do they feel working in a collective or versus working individually? Then the third is the type of surplus that is being produced by the project, which is then also the added value that maybe isn't necessarily not only recognized by the traditional economy, but also by the NEB Prize. And then the fourth is the way that our livelihood overlaps with our work in supporting our project. So the title is kind of a play on words. It's like, usually work supports your livelihood, but how does your livelihood also support your work? Then the fifth is focused on the zoonomic model that was brought forward by Trajna. So this was a really interesting session to collaborate also with them to come up with this mapping tool. We had Ellie, who's like a superstar intern. And that has to do with the types of other bodies that are present and that are both within your sphere and outside of your sphere, but that you still interact with. So now we'll see some examples. This was the example from Rovereto. So you'll see on top, they did a really nice, neat job of showing the funding that they've received over time. And it's nice because it also shows what these projects start with and how little maybe they start with and how they grow over time. It created a good narrative, I think.
Maybe just 2 words on Rovereto. Rovereto is a collective of mainly women, young women that live in a tiny village in the Italian Alps and are creating there some what they call the Academy of the Margins, really trying to kind of re-inhabit that village and through art and design to activate it. And yeah, it's quite amazing what they have been able to do. And they were winners of the kind of young people new European
Rising
Bauhaus.
Stars, that one.
Rising.
Then this is the how do you keep going in spite of everything? So the one all about precarity. So the triangle shows a very stable structure if it's on its base, but very unstable if it's on its tip. And here you can see how these tools also worked with a digital tool. In this case, we use Jamboard. It's a really nice example from Noi Ortadini, which again is a rising star from Matera, Italy. They're a community garden. Then this is the one about surplus. So in some cases, we tried to do a collective mapping. So this one isn't a representation of any individual project, but we did a kind of collective discussion and all mapped together what kind of surplus we think we're generating. And also, not only that, you can see here, there's also these indications with the vectors of work to regenerate and work to generate. So it's also in a way about how are we constantly building on the conditions that we started with and improving our conditions and changing our conditions. So that's why it's also kind of a dip in the soil that can be built on or degraded also at sometimes. Yeah. Then here's the famous cloud, which came from a project that I did with Bianca a long time ago. And we implemented it in a different way this time. It looks a bit bare, but what I find interesting about this tool that I'm always trying to experiment is also how it can be used just to position projects or just to position things between the different sphere of commons. So this one comes from the different categories of commons coming from the book Take Back the Economy, but then it's readapted. And so we had few participants this time, which is why it looks a bit bare, but you can see that we placed Forno Vagabondo and Krater, mostly towards spatial ecological as well as material, and then Floating University and Urban Garden Podgorica. Floating University is in Berlin, and the Urban Garden is in Montenegro, also placed themselves in a similar area, which is interesting, whereas the project itself, Neb Economies, was more towards the knowledge and social sphere of commons. And then this is the last, most recent one that we've done, which again was about the topic of zoonomy. And I think it came out really beautiful. We used a Miro board in this case. And this one is, again, a map of the community garden Podgorica in Montenegro. And we got really great feedback. Ivan is one of our more loyal followers. And he said that this was the most complete map that he felt he had created so far, and that it was a useful reflection for him, especially to think about surrounding ecosystems that would affect the garden. So you can see in the lower corner, there's the forest and the prairie, which obviously affect the pollinators and also potentially pests that would otherwise come into the garden but are staying in this other ecosystem. So that was an interesting reflection from his part. And I also appreciated that he mapped New European Bauhaus itself as a legal body as well that affects the project.
And so what we thought we find, I mean, now we are kind of before the last webinar, which we're doing on the 29th of November, and we're starting to look into these maps and into the transcripts of the discussions. And what we actually find is that really all the projects, they have amazing and very, very intricate community economies that they build on. But also what we saw is that actually, for instance, when we did the first mapping with the waterline mapping, what is the monetary and non-monetary support of your project? There was in some of the practices that they were actually getting a bit into a panic of like, oh my God, we're doing so much free labor. There is so much we are kind of bringing into this that doesn't you know, it really, the money part is so much smaller. And I think there was still a sense of like not living up to the standards or feeling this as a strong weight. Whereas I think there would be a strong potential looking at this through a community economies lens, really, to say, well, actually there is space for really powerful storytelling of how social change comes about and how we can actually propel the eco-social transition. And also this idea of we're actually creating a new world, and that there is the interface with the conventional kind of market is not really there. And it's quite amazing that we can sustain this, actually. Yeah. And I think for me, I mean, rather than a panic when we mapped, we got us in our group, because in La Foresta, we are very familiar with this feminist approach to the economy. We felt incredibly powerful after the mapping of saying, well, you give us, you know, a tiny input, and actually we're able to mobilize so much between us, and so much comes from us bonding together, trusting each other, and breaking out of individualization and pooling what we have. So I think there, simply from the sides of like design and architecture, there is a lot of potential there, which I think it needs a shift in perspective of how we approach it, that we're not I mean, because we operate with little money doesn't mean that we're less powerful. It actually shows the social power we have. And I think this is something that we would want to bring out also in the spring school, to discuss it with everyone for a week and see what narratives we can build on that. Then what we realized, even if you look at our image, kind of it's like everyone coming along to the sessions are basically white, more or less middle class designers and architects. And everyone talks about the fact how their work nourishes their soul, like what sense of satisfaction they get from doing this kind of more activist, transformative work. But I think very often we lack a bit of discussion of how can we mobilize those privileges we have to actually get everyone along, and to not play into this divide of like, yes, the commons community economies is for the middle class. It's for those who already have some sort of cushion that keeps them, and everyone else is included. And I think this, I mean, just seeing like how elections everywhere seem to be going lately, it really is something where I think we would need to become more sensible and sensitive as artists and as designers.
I can chime in on this topic also. I'm from the US. I don't know if you can tell. And I came to Italy to study design, and then started working on these kinds of European projects, and find that I'm able to work in a different way than I'm convinced, because it's not that I had so much experience in the US. But I'm convinced that I can work here in a different way than I would be able to work in the US. Like, I'm able to sustain myself through these kinds of projects, and through the cushion that I have as well. And I'm able to kind of choose the way I work, who I work with, and choose to work on something that I feel like I want to work on. You know, and so I think that La Foresta, for example, even though maybe in the working team there isn't a lot of diverse representation, it's still benefiting other communities of color and other more fragile communities as well. And I think that that's also important, because it's important to remember that we're working on a different timeline too, than we would be in different kind of work. So that's also, I think, important to remember, that this kind of thing takes time, and it's in a way just obvious that those who have more privilege are able to do these things. Whereas in other communities, like in New York, I think that commenting exists. In communities of color, it's just has a different form. It's not as formalized or as explicit or as, studied, let's say.
But there is something on like, how do we deal with this? How do we create spaces that are empowering for much more diverse groups of people? And this is something really, I think, in all of the projects we encounter is an issue that needs working on. And then what we also figured, and this is like the usual kind of art design dilemma, that is like life and work blend so much together, and that actually lots of people love it how life and work blend together, but it's also always on the kind of on the verge of going to a breakdown, or so, and also there I think it would be really a need to look into how do we do that actually when you run these practices, and I'm looking at the other artist designers here, it's almost, to us it feels like we're running a farm or something. We're running a life project where you cannot just go on a holiday or you take the weekend off. There is always like some animal, some plant, some land to tend to, and you cannot just get away from that. And how to really create maybe more, in a sense, of autonomous zones there in terms of what our aspirations are. Do we really want to live in single family houses? Do we really want to go on those nice holidays? Or is there other things we desire that are more connected to a kind of post-capitalist imaginary of what life could be like? Because somehow if I think of post-capitalism, definitely life and work, life and sustaining your livelihood, it will merge. There will not be such a neat cut, but how to get there without exhausting ourselves. So even like throughout the project now, we had people come to the sessions and struggle with all sorts of issues that go into the direction of burnout, and it's just like really kind of heartbreaking on the one hand to see how many of these NEP finalists are actually in a not very good condition, health-wise, mental health-wise, and still thinking, that's what the EU is kind of betting on, for pushing its ecological transition, for making it appealing, but actually the people doing the work are incredibly exhausted. And so what we want to be doing with the next session is actually to see how what we mapped in terms of economies, of what is going on behind the scenes of the new European Bauhaus projects, is to map it onto what the new European Bauhaus is pushing, which is on this slide. The new European Bauhaus is all about doing things together, doing them sustainably, and about beauty. And then bringing in participatory processes, transdisciplinary approaches, multi-level engagement. But then actually, what is this compass, this lens not seeing, and how to bring that in much more strongly?
I think it's quite interesting also that this is a mapping tool that they applied to all the projects, and like the mapping tools that we're developing maybe can also fit into these three categories in some way. That's kind of a second level of the research. Just wanted to talk a little bit about like the challenges of applying these kinds of mapping tools to such a diverse range of projects. We're going to show this tool implemented, also how it works. But in general, it's interesting to think about how some projects are linked to space, some aren't. Some projects involve like a really large collective of people, and some are basically just one individual. Some projects that have, have become the NEB finalists, continued after winning the NEB prize, and some didn't, but we're still mapping the projects. So, we have to think also about that in the design of these tools, and also in the format of the webinars, as we've been discussing with the other people in the network.
What also I think is interesting is the fact that, once you're shortlisted for the prize, you become part of the NEP community, of the new European Bauhaus community, but actually you don't know anyone except the people you already know. So, there is actually no community, no movement building really going on. And being like, maybe pessimistic about it, I would almost go to the, what Vanessa Andreotti is writing in Hospicing Modernity, where she talks about the fact that once modernity recognizes you, and this is what the new European Bauhaus, I mean, the Bauhaus is an icon of modernity. And now that they are with the new European Bauhaus, the institutions are recognizing our practices, they're finally seeing them. Have they lost all their transformative potential? Because once the system really starts to see you, does it mean that you are not scaring anyone anymore? And so we have a bit of this thing of saying like, well, actually, no. Yeah. Because even in the situation now, I mean, with the elections going the way, you know, they're going in the different countries, for us, it's really the work on the ground. How do we do this work and create democracy and equity in the spaces, at least where we live, so that people get real experiences of how life could be different? Yeah, basically, like the new, just to kind of like synthesize it, the new European Bauhaus maybe sees some things, you know, we're kind of signaling some things that they recognize and prize us with or prize us for. But the goal of this project is also to show the blind spots of this NEB compass. So obviously it's nice to be recognized in this way, but I think we need to also see where we can harness our powers. Like what else are we doing that maybe vaguely fits into this, but are bringing more nuance into this lens as well. So I would just go forward to talk about the Krater Creative Laboratory, which is the project of Trajna that we're partnering with for this project. And the reason I bring this to the presentation is because this actually comes from the NEB Compass guide. They used Krater along with other projects as a guide, and this is the New European Bauhaus's mapping of Krater, basically. And so it explains here also the way in which they see Krater fitting into the beautiful, sustainable, and together category. And you can see now, I don't know if you can really perceive the difference right away, but this is what the NEB compass looks like when it's filled out. So only partially. So in the one we showed before, this green one is completely filled, but you can see that the yellow one isn't completely filled and the blue one isn't completely filled, as well as these, I don't know what to call them, branches are completely filled. So each one basically are rated 1 through 3, just to make it really simple. So it's a visual representation, but it's actually quite numeric. It's just being rated 1 through 3. So Krater has quite a good rating, if you think about it that way. And then again, this is just explaining that. So basically, we would like to do an analysis also with the projects during the spring school to really bring this analysis into clear proposals to the European Bauhaus. So I think that the main steps for that are to identify which tools work well, and then what concrete, things came out of using those tools and implementing that. So what reflections the projects actually got from using those tools that then could be used to identify the blind spots of the NEB principles, which the NEB compass represents what they call the NEB principles. So beautiful, sustainable, together. Those are NEB principles. And then we want to get in contact to share the results. So this is where we would ask also for your feedback on maybe how to best go about this. Maybe if you have had any experience interfacing with policymakers or writing letters or writing manifestos or having meetings with important people up there. And this is where we would like to kind of launch the discussion with you. We're ahead of the game in that sense that we're, like I said, we're halfway through the project, but in the next year, we would really like to focus on this as well. So thank you for listening. You. So yeah, we wanted to use this session really to kind of start a reflection on what is it that is coming up here and how to bring it further. Because the whole aim is really to engage with the policymakers, with those who are actually pushing the new European Bauhaus initiative at EU level. Because what we see is that locally, at the moment, it's quite powerful to say that the kind of projects we're doing are actually directly linked to EU policies and initiatives. It gives us kind of, I think locally, it gives us strength because we're not just seeming like the maybe more utopian initiatives in our areas, you know, the ones that come up with concepts that are new in our contexts. But actually, we also see the friction that, you know, we're not actually really being seen for what we are producing. So yeah, we will just open up here, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think I'd like a bit more information about what the new European Bauhaus is looking for, and how do they judge the entries? How did they select these ones as being the ones that were going to get the prize or shortlisted or whatever? So I'm kind of I mean, it seems very interesting, but what is it they're looking for, and how is it that your projects fitted their bill? I suppose that's what just a bit more information on that would be helpful.
Yeah. So for the prize, you self-nominate. Basically, you fill in an application form where you need to explain. You can go for several categories. We were in reconnecting with nature. Then there is people and places who need it the most.
Yeah.
Like this. One is on education. And another one is, I think, on technology, on kind of industrial transition. And then you just answer questions of how is your project beautiful? You know, what's the aesthetic component of what you're doing? What's the sustainability component of what you're doing? And what's the social inclusion component? And you tell this story, and then it goes into a big pot. I think in 2022, it was 1,000 projects that sent in their applications, and there was 50 that got shortlisted. And then it's actually a bit of a black box that we don't exactly know who is sitting on the committee for the prize. So who is actually reading this and deciding who should come forward.
Yeah, we have this contact here that you had written down.
So yeah, one thing we figured out with La Foresta, I mean, we use it a lot, this reference to the new European Bauhaus when we interact with our policymakers locally. But realizing actually, you know, we're citing the NEP Compass, but we don't even know who authored it.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's so strange. Like, how would you do that? Like citing stuff that you don't even know who has produced it. I don't know. It's the more we interact with it, the more we get like questions on like, what's going on here? What's the game? And so on.
I have another question, Bianca. How does it, because they are also quite a large funding body now, no? The European, is there any connection between having won the prize and consideration for actual support that would help you extend what you're doing, for example, or sustain yourselves?
I think there is actually, like this Station for Transformation project that we got here in Rovereto through the municipality, which is worth 5 million euro, which are not all going to La Foresta, of course. It's like a fraction of it comes to us. But actually, this was all based on being included in the prize. So when our group went to Brussels during the festival, there were lots of trainings on funding applications. And there was just a whole narrative of like, hey, actually, we want projects like yours to apply for the funding. And these are the next funding applications coming up. So prepare yourself, look for partners. This is, you know, there was a real encouragement for it. And I think in our case, it kind of worked because it was really convincing the municipality also on saying, hey, there is a direct connection and there are direct invitations to people like us to participate. So I think in that sense, it's quite encouraging. It's super supportive. And what like I've been co-president of CIPRA, which is the International Commission for the Protection of the Alps, where I was sitting for almost 3 years on policy committees for our nature protection in the Alps. And for me, that's where I realized that actually getting something like the new European Bauhaus at that level in the EU to be pushed and to have funds means that lots of people must have been sitting at tables fighting for the funding to go to these kind of initiatives. Because what I see in these policy tables, I mean, you get people who are climate change deniers, you get all sorts of people sitting there putting pressure on, you know.
What Bianca's referring to is like
growth.
creating the European Bauhaus Prize to begin with.
Yes, to begin
There
with.
were people fighting on round tables, whereas I imagine that the process for assigning the prize itself is a lot more mechanical. They
Maybe.
have like a rubric. They rate them 1 through 3.
Maybe.
And the ones that have the most threes win, something like that. I mean, even with the Erasmus Plus project that we won for this this project, this new European Bauhaus meets Community Economies, I think certainly the fact that we have projects that won the prize helped us win this financing as well. It's a bit meta. We're working on that as well. And I've written other projects that didn't win the Erasmus Plus grant, and they provide, you know, a feedback with the points that you win. It's a lot based off of points. Like they certainly have a rubric that they give, and then the ones that win the most points win, like the funding. That's really as simple as that to a certain degree. Also because they have people working for them that go through and are trained to do the rubrics and that's it. So I imagine that the European Bauhaus Prize works in a similar way.
Could be.
But actually that's not true, because some projects also won through public vote.
Yeah, just one per category.
Yeah.
But it's something that, like for the spring school, we want to get new European Bauhaus, I don't know, someone of the executive board of the office coming to the spring school and having conversations of how does this actually work, to kind of also demystify a bit the whole thing and make this whole policy world, bring it down to people who is actually sitting there in the office and looking at the materials and so on.
I mean, they should be willing to meet with those who won the prize, you know?
I think
it's pretty clear.
But is there what is their agenda though? Is it social inclusion? Is it better architecture? Is it transition to a different society? Is it I mean, what is the thing that they're looking for? And I mean, and I know a little about the Bauhaus tradition, but is it, I mean, the beautiful thing is obviously there's an aesthetic aspect to it, but how is it fitting within the bigger picture of EU politics? That's what I'm trying to grasp.
Yeah. I think, I mean, for me, it's really interesting to listen to van der Leyen when she talks about it, because at the beginning, it was very much like, you know, the new European Bauhaus brings a soul to the Green Deal. So to this more technocratic vision, it brings it into, you know, it brings it into culture, it brings it into people's lives, and it makes it actually, I think it's about making things desirable on one hand, to be like, okay, this transition we don't need to be scared. It's actually, it feels good. It makes our places much better places to live in and so on. So I think it's very much aligned with that. Whereas in the most recent festival, you know, she was all about, and it was just before the elections, though it was all about the new European Bauhaus is a growth strategy. It's how we want to grow our economy.
Okay. So that's why she maybe changed her discourse also to fit the politics of the
time. I think it you know, because when she was elected the first time, it was the, you know, Fridays for Futures was really strong in Europe. You could really feel it. And there was also in the European elections, you could feel a wave of kind of young people, older people going for climate politics, whereas now it's shifted much more to the right. So the rhetoric is changing. And we're interested also in seeing, you know, where will this go now? Because actually, if you look at the projects winning the prizes, they're kind of yeah, I mean, it's very progressive stuff that is getting the prizes. It's really things where we go like, yes, this should be projects that should be getting the prize. You know, if I look at the work that that AAA is doing, I'm like, yes, of course you should be getting the prize. Definitely, like that's the way we should be going. Whereas that's not necessarily what the whole
discourse,
what the whole political spectrum thinks what should be winning. And yeah. So yeah, I think for us it's kind of interesting, this thing of like, we have never been so aligned with it, because for a long time, you know, our practice has just been invisible, I would say, or it was very difficult at the local level, at the regional level, to tell a story that this has actually potential and that this is contributing to change. It was like, no, you're utopian, or you're where is the profit in all of this?
How to scale it up?
How do you fund all this stuff? Where is the money here? Whereas,
but it's, in a way, it's not inconsistent with the UN recognizing the social and solidarity economy as an answer to the failure of business as usual, and ratifying it now at a particular level, and saying this is a legitimate thing and this is providing an alternative to business as usual. So in a way, it's a sort of a parallel kind of initiative where at the level of these international organizations, there's some kind of recognition of the things that we've been involved in for years, thinking we're always on the edge, and they're now saying, no, you've got the future, you're going to help us meet the sustainable development goals, etc. But in practice, you know, they still think the social and solidarity economy is going to help with competition, with gaining markets and stuff like that. So they still translate it into a sort of capitalist-centric language. So, but anyway, I agree there's an opening here, and that you're jumping into that opening, and how to use it is how to kind of push it is the thing that's really interesting. So that whole issue that you brought up about livelihoods and how, or you were saying, Sylvia, that you couldn't live in the US doing this work, but you can in Europe. And that's partly because, I presume, there's some state supports for livelihoods, you know, whether it's some, you know, public transport or assistance with housing, or, I mean, there's ways in which livelihoods are supported, but they could be more supported by something like a universal basic income, for instance, which, if there was a way of funding all these other people to do this kind of direct community building and nature work and all that, you could extend it to much more disadvantaged communities than the kind of people who have the sense of a middle class background that thinks, if I, you know, opt out of earning a lot of money, I'm still going to be okay, which I think that's partly that privilege aspect that you're talking about before, you know.
Right.
But, you know, are the Bauhaus people interested in those kind of intersections with economic policies or not? Or could, I don't know. I mean, anyway, that was just some of the thoughts I had. But
to clarify, for me, it's not just about like money. When I said that I couldn't see myself doing this work in the US, like I would be fine in the US. I have family support. I have family owned homes. Like I could live in the US if I wanted to. So it's still a choice for me. But for me, it's also the kind of recognition that I feel I'm getting for this kind of work in Italy in particular, where the connection between work and activism is actually seen as a thing. That your work can be an activist strategy, like you can be an activist through your work, is actually a thing here. Then obviously Europe exists, the European Union exists, there's funding for these kinds of projects that exist. It's a whole different kind of policy framework than what exists in the US, where kind of creates like this semi-permanent progressive policy strategy that is always there no matter what your local government looks like. You can always go for European funding, and that can always give you some kind of recognition, maybe also some kind of weight locally. What else can I say? Just the kind of relationship between livelihood and work, between life and work, that exists here that doesn't exist in the US. Maybe it's a more cultural thing, but it's also of course related to policy, of course related to economy. Like, I'm a lot more, I at least have been able to preserve my mental health better here doing this kind of work than I think that I would be able to in the US. And also, this kind of work I think is very racialized in the US also, in the sense that like that would be really, before I left the US, it was during COVID times, and it was when like defund the police was really active. Black Lives Matter was really active, and I became really radicalized in that period of time. And that really took a weight on my mental health too, because it's a really difficult, there's just so many overlapping issues and things in the US that of course exist here, but in a different kind of way, I think, as well. I went back where I came from in a way. You know, I always make this joke. Because I'm a fine citizen, so I have that privilege as well. That's an important thing to state. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm wondering about, you know, you were talking about blind spots, and I think you were also talking about maybe how to share privilege. I think it might be interesting to map the power in the European Bauhaus. So look at who actually sits on those committees. How do they make those decisions? How's the funding being given out? And I think, you know, like how representative are those committees of the kind of projects that they would like to give forward? And then I would look at like who actually applies for these projects, because I would say, you know, I have worked in the grassroots for a really long time. It's a very small percentage of really amazing work that ever gets to even consider themselves as being able to put themselves forward for something like that. So I think that's a really interesting question maybe to map. And I know it's not easy to map, but I think, and you know, of course, there is an incredibly ingrained inequality in all of these setups, but that doesn't mean that. So for example, I don't know if you follow that, Bianca, but in the UK at the moment, a lot of the funding bodies are seriously considering to decolonialize there and to kind of level the power structures and how they give out funding, who gives out the funding, or even just not being a funder at all anymore, but just handing over the money in the first place. And these are good precedences to use, because these are, you know, they're big bodies like Esme Fairbairn, the Tudor Trust, you know, even the National Lottery now is starting to really go down that route of understanding, like, if we have an unequal representation on our boards, how are we ever, you know, that's one. And then I think the other one is the gap between the actual activity of going out there and finding those projects rather than waiting for them to come to you. And then the next gap for me would be like European Bauhaus gives out funding themselves. They're a funding, like, it's a funding program within the European Union, you know, I mean, like, and it's really difficult to apply for European funding as a grassroots body. You always have to move along with the university, who then take 40% of the funds to take them into you know, so that is another setup by which we often don't even bother, because the administration is so unbelievably horrendous. But there is a lot of money out there for exactly this kind of research, if they're really on it, if they really mean it, which, you know, we all know they some of them do. And I think there will always be some people within these, and these are the people that will at some point make those changes. So I think it's putting a face also to who. I'd be super interested to know who they are, and there must be a public record of who they are. That must have to be the case. Somewhere. You know, and maybe if, especially if you go via people who have won the prize, to also make a coalition of all those people and ask those questions. I think that would be really powerful, and make them public, ask them publicly, you know, so they can't refuse.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about how this project can continue beyond just this next year.
Mhm.
In that sense, not in the sense that we have to get funding or more funding or something but to like empower everyone who's been involved so far to make these kinds of requests.
Yeah, but I think you're quite right with like the end for all these funding applications is so high. On a PhD, I would never had the confidence to even just sit down and write and say, yes, we can do this. Because I've been brought up with this kind of like, you come from a rural place and you're small and you're not, the standards are set by someone else and you're not up to it. And then it's just like, I think through that training and through finally encountering feminist theory when I was 30, be like, okay, there is actually some help out there, there is oxygen and we can do this stuff. And I think there is a lot of like, the entry level is so high, even to just figure out what the language is you need to apply in English. I mean,
yeah,
who has a good enough level of English to write these applications? It's quite a thing. But I also think, and I'm looking at Tom there, that there is an opening at the moment still, because also the EU is funding lots of projects on degrowth, on post-growth. So there is a real interest that wasn't there 10 years ago. And how to fill that interest with practice, with actually saying, this is stuff happening and it's transforming people's lives. It's transforming the futures of the territories we live in. And that, for me, that's like the super exciting part of saying like, what happens in practice and how do we research this stuff through practice as well. And there I'm wanting to go to Tom's session on like, how does degrowth, post-growth and community economies meet? Like, how can we also team up and have a much stronger voice all together, probably? Yeah.
Maybe if this discussion is kind of coming to an end about the policy side, maybe we can also open the discussion about the maps themselves, what you guys thought about them. If it was interesting to you from a visual standpoint, even just like, because I know we went through them quite quickly. Just, yeah, any of your thoughts, we can do kind of a peer review, a live peer review session of what you thought of those tools. We can go back and open them as well, obviously.
Yeah, if it's okay, I would love to see the surplus one again, and maybe it just I got it lost in it, and I would love to see what.
I think you have WhatsApp or something.
Yeah, something is beeping. Sorry.
There it is.
This was the surplus?
Yeah. No.
No.
The land, the soil.
Where is this?
This one.
There it is.
Yes, this. So this is a collective one, is it? This is various projects?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was really one of the challenges of this project was also just to do the webinars in a way that they weren't too long, but there was enough room for discussion collectively, but there was also enough room for individual reflection, and there was also enough time to map. So we experimented. This project was also is also in a way just a research on how to do these various formats and develop these tools to see how they work. It's an experiment. So in this case, we did it collectively, and it was a facilitated discussion by me and Andre mainly. Andre and from Trajna and I designed this particular tool, based off of the concept of surplus, also coming from Take Back the Economy.
I'm finding it hard to read the little pieces that
yeah, they are. We can zoom. I think we can.
But and then the image of I didn't realize when I saw before that was a soil profile. Is it like it's the top of the soil and and the dip is something. Is the dip important or not? It's just
the dip is important. Initially we had made it like a mound of soil, but then we realized that the ground that many of us are working on maybe is already degraded and needs to be rebuilt in some way. And so that's why we decided to do it this way. But again, like I think that whoever is working on the map is also kind of free to redraw the soil line how they wish to do it as well. Like a lot of times they were doing pen and paper and they could draw it however they want. And then the idea is that inputs here, so the concept, like the binary concept of inputs and outputs are kind of being made into like a non-static thing. So the inputs are like the conditions that we're building on rather than just being a material input. So it's everything that we're building on, and then outputs are the conditions that we create that then also can cycle, right? So I think this was one of the most conceptually abstract tools, but I think the tool itself is a really nice metaphor, because then it was hard to implement, but the metaphor that it created, I think, is quite strong with this work to generate, work to regenerate. The work to regenerate is what creates new conditions that we build on, and the work to generate is what creates outputs.
I think for me, this one was really quite nice to think in time as well.
Yeah.
Because in my practice, we have this thing of saying, you know, we're doing a 40-year research project. We want to figure out over 40 years, what can we bring to the commons and to community economies, starting from the place where we live? What will happen? And it's very much this thing of like saying, okay, what are we generating? What will the next generation build on? So when we started out, it was very much, okay, probably we have, like, if we're lucky, maybe we have another 40 years of work and life ahead of us, and we're going to dedicate that, like, quite specifically. And then saying, well, actually, on one hand, we could be dying like tomorrow. And this has come by quite a few friends having died very suddenly over the last few years, and be like, oh, okay, maybe I don't have to, you know, this vision of like, I'm 30 and I'm gonna live long. It's like, no, actually, no. But then also thinking, what do we leave? Like now we think more like 40 plus. What will it be that we are generating for the next ones to build on? Like to really see ourselves in a sort of genealogy of activism, of transformation. And there, I think it's really interesting. We create stuff that is being composted, that is being transformed, and then others build on it. Or maybe we build on something we have done 10 years ago. But as we stay in the same place, we can actually totally, you know, then it has decayed and the moment is right. And we can then actually start a plant or a project that, you know, maybe we had in mind, but the soil was not ready at all. And to give it more breathing space, because sometimes I think we are so, it needs to be happening now, and it's not happening, and it's so hard. And to be like, just relax into the situation. We got to give ourselves some time, give processes time, and then just be ready when the moment is right, when the conditions are okay.
Yeah, I think sometimes we have to realize that we don't really know everything, like that things are uncertain, and that's okay. And that, like, something that for me works in my thinking is just like, what else would I be doing? You know what I mean? Like, what else would I be doing
if not this?
If not this, like I don't really have an alternative. So for me, at least, I have the privilege to choose to work on this and not do a job that is just for making money, but I can work on stuff like this, and I can do my best. And what else would I be doing, you know, if not this?
I mean, one of the things about that time frame, though, Bianca, and is that it's so opposed to the usual policy time frame, and you know, and the election time frame, for instance, and needing results in order to show your worth, etc. So resisting that, and this is something that we've been thinking about, I think, in the Institute, like, you know, the sort of impact of our work. Sometimes it's, you know, it's been like 20 years ago that some of this action research was done, and maybe some of the impact can't be seen till, you know, 20 years later, something like that. But it's hard to actually track that down. But it doesn't fit within the agenda of, you know, a local government that wants to see outputs now or whatever. So there's a whole kind of other it's like a parallel universe here of temporality that you're working with that would lead to a different kind of policy, you know, that intergenerational policy, which, you know, obviously is in Indigenous communities, that 7 generations idea, you know, how can we think forward to 7 generations from what we're doing now, or and what have we inherited from 7 generations backwards? It's a whole other way of thinking about things. Maybe if the European Community Bauhaus, whatever, could adjust a little bit to that kind of thinking, it'd be great. But it doesn't mean we can't do that, and we can't have that other, you know, put that temporality into some kind of more formal framework. Because I think, you know, at the moment it's sort of metaphorical, really. It's not, maybe there is a need for a more kind of, you know, structured timeline of intergenerational planning. You know, I mean, I've been thinking about that, you know, in the light of the election result just recently, saying, you know, Julie and I were working on deindustrialization of parts of it in the 80s. So we've known forever that there were disadvantaged communities and men that were losing any sense of what their job was or role was in the US. And now it's their kids that have grown up with that are now, you know, going to Trump rather than voting, you know, in the way they used to. But, you know, that's 2 generations that we've known what was going on, that nothing was done.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And why don't we think about these things in sort of intergenerational kind of timeframes, like they did, I think, in Germany around the closure of the coal mines in the Ruhr Valley? You know, the huge investments went in so that the children of the coal miners have got some other kind of work to do. But that took a very kind of, I don't know, much more central planning kind of approach to things than most of the societies we're living in now are willing to do. But maybe there is a need for a kind of a community economies perspective on that kind of planning, that we develop those kind of frameworks, even just for, you know, for people doing participatory democracy or whatever, like we talked about in the other session.
Yeah, I think there is lots of potential in the intergenerational, because I think also in terms of like how we think of our livelihoods, it makes you structure stuff very differently. Like in La Foresta, we're now really kind of putting lots of energy into creating housing commons, because we think that that's actually going to be a game changer. In all these discussions we have of who is struggling and why we're struggling.
Yeah, you're right.
A lot of the conversations are about rent. And so it's like, okay, so, you know, let's do the cultural work, let's do the baking, let's do all of that, but let's also work on collective housing, and to keep that in perpetuity, like for the next 2, 3, 5 generations. We want to build the conditions that others who would be in our genealogy of like eco-social activism, they have housing secured, and it's not depending on the state, but it's depending on a grassroots kind of securing resources for this kind of work. And sometimes I think we're just too focused on like, where is the money coming from? Is there enough money coming in? Whereas our livelihoods are based on lots of other exchanges and resources and assets that we, you know, we rest on. And I think we're kind of staring into this light at night, which is money, and everything else becomes dark. We can't see it, and to take that away a bit. And for me, some of these tools, and this is, I think, where we need to test it, are more like educational, reflective tools, rather than something that we can directly map back to the Bauhaus. So maybe really for the next session, it would be about, could we have at least one tool that is much less complex, but that kind of speaks back in that kind of shorthand of beautiful, sustainable together. Just has this other shorthand for the economic.
Could be. Yeah, I just brought us back to this overview slide in case you needed a reminder of what the tools we've made so far are. And also, if you want to see more closely any of them, feel free to ask, and I'll go to that slide.
I think Bianca would, if I can
add
something. So sorry, I was just had a crazy morning and didn't make it here on time. It's just so much of it's so interesting to me in terms of the idea of the 40-year plan, the idea of looking into the future. I think my feeling is that we're in the situation we're in now politically because of not thinking that way. And I think short-term responses to acute problems are, this is how I'm starting to think of it, in like kind of like bringing together left and right wing politics and this kind of holistic thing. And like I feel like responses to acute problems are right wing, tend to be right wing responses. You know, if you have to, if you're facing a polarized, violent situation against what's, kind of the core source of your identity and your feeling of survival, then you'll turn to a right wing response, and that makes sense based on the information that you have and on the situation as it is. And alternative to it, they have to be long term. They have to be gradually constructed, because if you don't, if you're not planning on this, then the problems become acute, and then people don't have the resources to. This is like the kind of psychological left and right, maybe. Kind of, because that's what I'm asking. Like, what goes on in the mind of these, angry people who are voting for Trump, who are, who are supporting, Benjamin Netanyahu, these kind of things. What are these people? The massive amount of people like that scares me a lot more than those leaders themselves and what the policies that they do. So so that's one thing. And the other thing is about housing. I didn't realize that you guys are going in that direction, because Bianca, we've been talking about my friends in Barcelona, a group called La Fundición, and they're also starting to go into this idea of housing commons, housing cooperatives. And they told us they have several storefront spaces. This is happening in what's considered to be the most densely populated neighborhood in Europe, a very, I don't know, stigmatized neighborhood in the outskirts of Barcelona is where they work. And through art, they're artists, but they're creating all these spaces for community economies, and they're using the language of community economies as well, as is the City Council of Barcelona. I've realized just recently have been using this language. And they said, yeah, we own these spaces. We bought these and they said they're formally cooperative, and they said it's cooperative. It's our cooperative policy. So they just like said that kind of tongue in cheek, just cooperative policy. We have to own these spaces, which I thought was funny. And they didn't go more into it, but I'm gathering from it that they're thinking in a kind of a similar way.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have other questions, I mean, for us, it has been super generative to have this conversation, because we've been in this mapping process and organizing webinars and so on, to just kind of take a step back and be like, what is actually happening here, and what kind of information or knowledge is emerging.
Yeah, no, it's been fascinating. It's been a great session. I want to see how it unfolds.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we're going to have a session next year to kind of see what point did we get to, also with connecting with the policymakers. And see.
Next year there'll be a publication as well, so we could definitely do, a more like, how do I put it? Like a more clear narrative around it. This was a really open session where we just wanted to share what we've done so far and get some feedback, and it's been really helpful to have just a moment to like reflect and see it all together so far.
Yeah.
How many people usually come to your webinars? And are there people who've already been in that shortlisted group?
Yeah, in total, we've had about 16 different people attend the webinars, I would say.
Yeah,
16 practices. But each webinar has been very small, like sometimes only like 2 other practices
Yeah.
join at some times.
Mm.
But that's okay. We've
Yeah.
had really like
Good
the map with
conversations.
that we did with Ivan came from the last session, and it was literally 2 practices.
Mm.
But we the 2 maps side by side together with them, and like really had
Yeah.
a good facilitation. It was like easier to facilitate in that way and like get them
Yeah.
to the point of having a complete map. Whereas in the other sessions, it was a lot harder to get to a complete map in the time that we had with multiple people. So
Yeah.
I think it is what it is. Like we have to let go also of this feeling of like needing to reach a lot of people, or like needing to you know, accomplish X amount in a certain amount of time. I like the emergent strategy concept of critical connections over critical mass a lot. That helps keep me going a lot of the times, because I think, yeah, I mean, having a really good session with 2 rather than like a superficial session with many is okay. And like I said, it's a experiment. So it is what it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Great to see everybody.
Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you.
Day or nice
Have a
evening.
lovely day or night.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much, Bianca. Wonderful.
You stay until the end.
Yeah, because we have to record.
Thanks, Prior, for all the work you put into this.
Yeah.
Bye.
Ciao.